status quo where our province is being treated unfairly by a federal government for close to a decade now.
Not just Alberta, Saskatchewan's upset, Quebec is upset. I think that you'll hear from other provinces there also.
Separation from Canada.
Saskatchewan just officially confirmed their independence from Canada, and it's about to rip the country apart from the inside out. After years of watching Ottawa bleed their resources dry and give back nothing but climate policies and condescending lectures, they've finally said screw it, we're out.
You know, those feelings of alienation, anger, they shouldn't be discounted in any way.
And now, with courts bracing for impact and Mark Carney barely 6 months into his chaos-filled reign, Saskatchewan is about to write the most rebellious chapter in Canadian history, with their own laws, economy, and trade deals to match. And believe me, Saskatchewan isn't bluffing anymore. It's done playing Canada's quiet, obedient province.
You know, various constituents are telling them and talking to them about the frustration and really what I call the alienation that, you know, far too many people in Saskatchewan as well as other parts of Canada.
After years of being pushed to the sidelines, the province has now made it official. It wants out. This isn't some backyard rant or Facebook conspiracy.
Most recent federal election was 65% of Saskatchewan people didn't vote for that status quo either, Mr. Speaker. But it is not a straw man argument where it's status quo or separation.
Saskatchewan's declaration of separation is backed by legislation, polling, and a population that's flat out exhausted. In the last federal election, 65% of voters rejected Ottawa's vision. That's not just a political swing, it's a warning siren. And the message is clear. If Alberta ever jumps ship, Saskatchewan won't be far behind.
You know, these are all responsive feelings that Saskatchewan residents have. And so, you know, with respect to, you know, feeling some of that frustration, I would hope that our caucus, being a governing caucus, is large enough that it's reflective of the communities that they...
One MLA even said it outright. They're planning their own escape route. The provincial government isn't trying to contain this momentum. Premier Scott Moe, he's practically handing over the keys. If the people want to vote, he's not standing in the way. That's not leadership, that's silent permission.
Sure, there's people that, yes, absolutely want to separate from Canada. I think you could narrow that down to largely being frustrated. I'm frustrated with the unconsulted decisions that have come from Ottawa.
What started as alienation is now a full-blown movement. And it's not being led by suit and tie elites or polished talking heads. It's coming from church basements, rural co-ops, TikTok lives, and Facebook groups that started small and suddenly became louder than the national press. The Buffalo Party, born in 2020, didn't even win a single seat, but it stomped over the Liberals in multiple ridings. That wasn't a win on paper, but it was a massive win in energy.
Our province is being treated unfairly by a federal government for close to a decade now, supported every step of the way by the NDP, Mr. Speaker.
Real people, real frustration, and no filter. By 2022, things went from social media to legislation with the Saskatchewan First Act. On paper, it's about resources. In practice, it's a giant middle finger to Ottawa's control. And then came the leaks. Actual conversations in caucus where MLAs weren't shy about preparing for life after Canada.
Federal election was 65% of Saskatchewan people didn't vote for that status quo either.
And here's where it gets even louder. Gen Z is driving the getaway truck. The same generation that politicians thought would be too passive or too distracted has become the loudest voice for sovereignty. A full 42% of young voters in Saskatchewan want a referendum on independence. That's not frustration. That's a movement with a deadline. If just one more resource project gets shut down, polling experts say support could blow past 50%.
Saskatchewan to continue to grow and prosper in its economy, to grow its population, grow our communities, reinvest back into those communities, all within a strong, united nation of Canada.
At that point, Ottawa doesn't get to debate it. A referendum becomes constitutionally valid. And it's no surprise, young people are done waiting for hand-me-downs. They want ownership over their careers, their future, their land. Right now, they see Ottawa as the problem, not the solution, and they're voting with their feet.
Real and serious concerns about these regulations.
Thousands of skilled workers have already started leaving Saskatchewan since 2022. Nurses, welders, tech workers, all chasing stability in Alberta or across the border in the US. And the job forecasts are brutal. If nothing changes, Saskatchewan could lose 18% of its skilled labor force by 2026. That's not a dip, that's a collapse.
Separation from Canada. It is something that has come up since the Liberals were given another term in government in last month's federal election.
The message from the younger generation is brutal but honest. If this province can't break free and build something for itself, then they'll leave and find somewhere that can. For them, this isn't about tradition or flags. It's about building a life without being choked by red tape and punished for producing the resources that keep the rest of the country alive.
Has been lowered in Alberta, and a referendum petition is making the rounds here at home.
Scott Moe isn't shouting into microphones or waving flags at independence rallies, but don't confuse silence with neutrality. His exact words were, "If the people want to vote, I won't stop them." That's not diplomacy, that's a quiet endorsement. Moe knows exactly what's brewing under his watch, and instead of slamming on the brakes, he's gently steering the wheel toward the off-ramp.
The Supreme Court did hold in 1998 that if a clear majority on a clear question votes to leave Confederation, and they had Quebec in mind, but the logic would apply just as much or almost as much to Alberta and Saskatchewan.
And it's not just him. His entire caucus is peppered with pro-sovereignty voices who have stopped whispering and started speaking plainly. These aren't fringe radicals. They're elected officials who openly say their constituents are demanding real autonomy, not token reforms or empty consultation.
Then an obligation would fall upon the federal government to negotiate in good faith the exit.
The internal climate is tense. There's a clear split between those still clutching to the idea of confederation and those who have one foot out the door. But the fence sitters, they're shrinking in number. The freedom pushers, the ones talking about resource control, tax independence, and constitutional rights, are now steering the conversation.
Basically, that's never happened, and those are qualitative rather than quantitative criteria.
The passage of the Saskatchewan First Act in 2022 wasn't just a legislative move, it was a signal flare. It gave legal backbone to the separatist momentum while letting Moe keep his hands technically clean. It told Ottawa to back off from the province's natural resources while allowing the public to read between the lines. Moe didn't say we're leaving, but he definitely laid out the legal map for how to do it.
As a matter of Canadian constitutional law, there'd have to be some negotiation, and suppose that may or may not occur. Now, if Saskatchewan or Alberta.
What's critical here is that Moe isn't copying Justin Trudeau's centralized, heavy-handed political playbook. He's doing the opposite. No federal-style mandates, no scolding tone. Instead, he's letting the grassroots heat rise and creating just enough legal room for the movement to breathe. It's calculated. If this train goes off the tracks, Moe can claim he was merely listening to the will of the people. But make no mistake, that's not hesitation, it's insulation. He's not leading the breakaway, he's legitimizing it, slowly and quietly, one legal measure at a time. And while Saskatchewan plays chess, Ottawa is out here panicking like they just found a hole in the hull.
Separating with Alberta, and it has to stop. It's fear-mongering.
Behind closed doors, they've started holding what insiders are calling war room simulations. Yes, actual tabletop scenarios on how to respond if Saskatchewan or Alberta formally declares independence. This is no longer a joke to federal planners. It's a real problem with real numbers and real momentum. And their answer to all this? Mark Carney, the guy Ottawa dusts off and rolls out whenever they want to sound smart, but not actually connect with anyone who lives west of Ontario.
They would become independent states as a matter of international law.
Carney's big intervention came in early 2024 when he declared Saskatchewan's push for independence economically irrational. That was supposed to calm people down. It backfired spectacularly. He got roasted across social media platforms, especially by prairie influencers and citizen journalists who dubbed him Canada's Macron on mute. And that nickname stuck because it's brutally accurate. Like Emmanuel Macron, Carney loves podiums, panels, and podcasts, but unlike prairie voters, he's never had to shovel grain, fix a rig, or watch federal climate policy decimate his livelihood.
And the Supreme Court did acknowledge that that was a possibility. It might not necessarily be constitutional, and given how other states tend not to recognize breakaway provinces unless the federal government has condoned the departure.
Let's not forget, this is the same man who tanked public trust during his stint at the Bank of England, bored the UK to death with spreadsheets, and flamed out of Canadian politics before he ever had a chance to win a seat. And now, Ottawa wants him to explain the economy to people whose farms and oil fields have been gutted by the very policies he endorsed. It's almost poetic how tone-deaf that is. Carney's carbon pricing schemes are being blamed directly for choking the western provinces, especially Saskatchewan's energy and agricultural sectors. Remember the promise? Cap at $50 per ton. Now it's climbing past $170 with no end in sight. And Carney's still musing about going higher.
Of separating without involving Indigenous peoples as the first step, that's a form of disrespect that's being shown to the chief.
Out in Saskatchewan, that's not policy, that's betrayal. People aren't stupid. They know when their economy is being sacrificed for optics. What they hear from Ottawa is lectures. What they see is red tape, and what they feel is economic strangulation wrapped in moral superiority. Carney represents all of it. The elite mindset, the detachment from rural life, the obsession with global image over domestic reality.
Theoretically, it could happen de facto, even if not legally proper.
Saskatchewan doesn't want Carney's TED Talks. It wants its resources back. Its uranium, potash, and wheat aren't props for a carbon-neutral fantasy. They're the backbone of a provincial economy that's sick of Ottawa claiming ownership. The fact that federal agents are even being discussed as a security risk on provincial project sites says everything.
Our response to the policies that have been put in place over the last number of years, policies that, as you know, in this gallery and this province, that this government has opposed every step of the way.
And here's the kicker. No one's listening to him. Prairie MLAs aren't quoting Carney. They're quoting their voters. The electorate isn't logging into his economic forums. They're logging into TikTok, Telegram, and town hall Zoom calls where separation is the only thing on the agenda. Carney may think Saskatchewan's independence push is irrational, but from where the province stands, with the land, the oil, and the people ready, Ottawa looks like the one still living in denial.
I actually think it's alienation that many Canadians are feeling. And so if you're asking, are there caucus members that are, feeling frustrated with respect to the, use the examples, Bill C-69.
Over 30% of Saskatchewan's land is covered by treaty protections. And that's not just a footnote, it's a full-blown legal minefield. As talk of independence gets louder, First Nations leaders across the province are standing firm. You can't leave with land that was never legally yours. This isn't symbolic resistance. This is grounded in actual enforceable legal protections, backed not just by Canadian law but international law as well. Indigenous groups are already preparing to escalate the situation to the United Nations and the International Court of Justice. That's right. While the province is drafting separation laws, First Nations are drafting global lawsuits.
The carbon tax going to $50, never go higher. Then very shortly after, it's going to go to $170 and musing about even higher than that. These are all responsive feelings that Saskatchewan residents have. And
some of these treaties date back to the numbered treaties signed between 1871 and 1921, and their language isn't vague. It's specific, binding, and legally protected under Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution. That means even if Saskatchewan tries to walk away from Ottawa, it doesn't automatically get to walk off with the land. Indigenous leaders have already made it clear. Any new nation formed without First Nations consent is nothing more than a land grab in violation of both domestic sovereignty and international law.
Being a governing caucus is large enough that it's reflective of the communities that they represent.
And this isn't just about legal documents. It's about territorial power, resource access, and historical accountability. A massive chunk of Saskatchewan's uranium fields, oil land, and agricultural zones overlap directly with treaty territory. That means any new border line would cut straight through unresolved ownership disputes. The federal government may be Ottawa's problem today, but if Saskatchewan moves toward independence, First Nations become the legal front line, and they're not backing down quietly.
Discussion, and it's a fair discussion to have given the frustrations that are there. We all need to have our eyes wide open with respect to, what does conducting a referendum look like? There's a process for that, and we can discuss that. The process has been here for 40 years in Saskatchewan. We see the opposition trying to change that.
While Saskatchewan is trying to unlock the exit door, some First Nations are already holding the keys to the ground under their feet. They're not just demanding a seat at the table, they're questioning whether the table belongs to Saskatchewan in the first place. If the province tries to secede without Indigenous consent, it risks not just a political disaster, but a total legal implosion that could paralyze its economy, halt resource extraction, and throw international recognition into question. You can draw borders on a map, but if the land inside those lines is under global dispute, you haven't founded a country. You've started a courtroom war.
Within reason. I suspect that's what they're aiming for, and there's nothing incompatible with the Canadian Constitution. And that, I guess the flip side of what they're saying is that if our concerns are not addressed, or we feel as though they have been not addressed, then we're willing to explore separation. It's kind of raising the stakes.
And while the legal fog thickens in the north, things are heating up in the west. Literally. In boardrooms from Calgary to Houston, a completely different game is being played. The Western Economic Compact. Quiet emails and closed-door meetings have already started among officials and energy strategists from Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba, and interior British Columbia, all eyeing a future where they no longer need Ottawa's approval. These provinces are working on a model that would allow them to form a 4-province trade bloc, backed by Texas oil money and American investors.
It's quite clear that our confederation can accommodate regional difference, respecting that different provinces have different priorities and cultures that need to be respected.
No more waiting for national energy strategies that never arrive. No more fighting carbon tax hikes from bureaucrats who've never set foot on a wheat field or stood near a drilling rig. Under this new plan, Saskatchewan's vast stores of potash, uranium, and oil would no longer flow east to be taxed and regulated. They'd flow south, becoming weapons in a new global commodity battle. But this time, under Saskatchewan's own terms. But if that sounds revolutionary, that's because it is. A province that's fighting First Nations over treaty land while simultaneously building a new oil-backed economy with foreign investors?